Half a day and welcome to Freshman Genetics. Previously I referred to this video as the law of dominance, but we need to revise that, and instead of referring it to the law of dominance, it is now referred to as the principle of dominance, and that just has to go with laws are always true, and principles, there's a little bit of room for variation, and that's why we refer to this now as the principle of dominance. So we want to first start off by defining a couple key terms. We will refer to traits, and trait is a characteristic, and that can be something in talking about Mendel's experiments. One of the traits he studied was pod color of the pea plant pods. And we'll talk about alleles, and alleles are the various forms of that trait. So in the case of Mendel's pod color, there were two traits. They would either have green pods or yellow pods. So the trait is the basic characteristic, and then the allele are the different variations. So if they had green pods, then they had the green allele, and if they had yellow pods, then they had the yellow allele, and the general trait was for pod color. At the time Mendel was doing his experimental investigations, the field of genetics was just beginning, and there was a lot of things that we did not know. Of course, at this time, DNA had not been discovered, and none of the information that we currently know about how these traits are passed on to one another was unknown. So in Mendel's time, he referred to things as factors, but now we can look to see that what is being controlled, these alleles and these traits are being controlled by our genes. And genes are the DNA code that makes the protein that's needed for that particular trait to be expressed. Most genes are going to have a very long sequence of DNA that actually codes for them. So basically, as an example, I just put a rambling of A, T, C, and G, and basically this particular code could look at pod color, for example. So this may be the code that codes for the yellow color to be expressed in the plant, or this may be the code that causes for the green color to be expressed. And you would have to research that, and some of that information is now available online to find out what these actual genetic sequences are. But genes are what basically control it, and when the gene is transcribed and then translated, it will make a protein. That protein is then responsible for either making a particular coloration, it may be responsible for an enzyme, that enzyme then controls a chemical reaction that causes a particular trait to appear. And all of these things are items that geneticists are currently researching, so we can figure out more about how our bodies end up becoming ourselves, how we become ourselves. One of the things that Mendel came to in his conclusions is called the principle of dominance, and this is stating that some alleles are dominant and some are recessive. And basically, in his experimentation, he found that if he crossed a round with a wrinkled plant, that he found that all of the times those were crossed, they ended up with round offspring. And he did this with all the various traits, and he found that when you were comparing the two, that one type of trait, such as yellow, such as the tall and the axial flowers, were always found if you were to cross a tall plant with a short plant. You always ended up with tall. If you crossed yellow with green, you ended up with yellow, as far as the seed color goes. And so this information was the basis for his principle of dominance. Another conclusion that Mendel was able to make was called the principle of segregation. So in this, Mendel had assumed that the dominant allele was masked, and there was a corresponding recessive allele in some of the generations, and that's why the particular trait did not show up. And so one of the reasons that he suggested was that the two alleles are segregated from each other during the formation of the gametes, or the sex cells, the egg and the sperm. And when they're separated, each gamete will carry just one copy of the gene. And then when fertilization occurs, those two copies of the gene come together and they will provide the DNA code, or the gene, for a particular trait to appear. And we have now found that this is indeed the case, and when we have the formation of that, we know that we receive half of our genetic information from our mothers and half of our genetic information from our fathers, and together they interact, and that makes us all the unique beings that we are. One of the easiest ways to be able to visualize what's happening is to use the Punnett Square. And the Punnett Square is a way for us to be able to figure out what the probability is that a particular trait will be expressed in a future generation. When we do this, we use simple letters to stand for the particular allele that we are looking for. So in the case of the problem we're going to show right now, capital T will indicate tall and lowercase t will indicate short. Now, according to the principle of dominance, the tall pea plants are known to be dominant over the recessive, which the lowercase t, standing for short, is the recessive. So if we were to take a parent, if we used his true breeding, Mendel's true breeding plants, we would have a parent that would be capital T, and we would have a parent that would be lowercase t. So the first parent would be pure breeding for tall, and the second parent would be pure breeding for short. Now, to do a Punnett square, we utilize the law of segregation, so we know that this parent here is going to pass on only one of these genes to its offspring, which would be a possible capital T, or in this case, capital T also. This parent will pass on lowercase t or a lowercase t. Then this is basically symbolizing the gametes of the particular organism. So for this parent, they would produce gametes with these alleles, and this parent would produce these gametes. Now we're going to look at possible fertilization. So if this parent and if this particular gamete and this gamete came together, then our offspring would have this combination of genes. If this parent, and how we do this is we bring the one across and then the other one down. The other one across and the other one down. And here we see that all of our offspring would have the genotype capital T, lowercase t. And we know by the law of dominance that all of these offspring would demonstrate the tall trait. So if we look at these particular ones again, capital T is the dominant allele, and only one copy is needed for the offspring to display this particular allele. So you could have an offspring that is capital T, or capital T, lowercase t, but both of those will display the tall allele. And if we have the recessive, lowercase t, the offspring actually need two copies of that recessive allele in order to display it. So your offspring, if they had lowercase t, then they would be short, and that is what they would display. Now if we do another example, if we have a capital T, lowercase t plant, and capital T, lowercase t plant. And capital T stands for tall, and it is dominant over the lowercase t, which is short. So if this is our parent cross, then we will find, using a Punnett square, what the potential outcomes of our offspring may be. So this parent here, we are going to take, according to the law of segregation, will only pass on one of these alleles to its offspring. So the capital T and the lowercase t will be separated. So capital T will be in some of the gametes, and lowercase t will be in other gametes. And the same goes for this parent. Some of their gametes will have capital T, some of their offspring will be passed on the lowercase t in their gametes. How we figure out the Punnett square is very similar to a mathematical multiplication type chart, where we take this allele and we place it into this first box. So we'll have the capital T. Then we take this allele and we bring it down and place it into this box. So again, we'll have capital T. Here we'll take this one, bring it across, and we will take this one and bring it down. Same goes for the next row. We're going to take this one and move it over. And we are going to take this one and move it down. We take this one and move it over. And we take this one and move it down. So here you can see that we get a variety of potential genetic codes for these offspring. We have offspring with capital T, capital T, capital T, lowercase t, and lowercase t, lowercase t. So when we're looking at this particular cross, we still have the parents with capital T, lowercase t, and then we're looking at the potential offspring. So first thing we're going to look at is the phenotype. Now the phenotype is the actual physical characteristic, or what we see, or what is actually being displayed of that particular offspring. So if we look at the law of dominance and we know that capital T is dominant over lowercase t, tall is dominant over short, we can see that this particular offspring, this offspring, and this offspring are all going to be tall. So we actually have 3 out of 4 of our offspring would be predicted to be tall. And if we look at the one that is recessive, which remember it needs 2 copies of the recessive allele in order to be displayed, we have 1. So we'll have 1/4 will be short. Now these are the probabilities for this particular parent cross, that if these parents were crossed together, we would expect an outcome of approximately 3/4 or 75% of the offspring will be tall, and 1/4 or 25% of the offspring will be short. So if again we look at the same cross, we're going to look at this time the genotype, or the genotypic probabilities for this particular cross. And this is actually what is the genetic makeup of the individual. So there's 3 different types of genetic makeup. We have 2 capital T's. We have a capital T and a lowercase t, and we have 2 lowercase t's. So in this case, if we look at our options here, we see that 1/4 of our offspring will have the genotype capital T, capital T. If we look here, we will see that this one and this one, or 2/4, which can be either used as 2/4 or you can say 1/2, will be capital T, lowercase t. And we see that we have 1/4 of our offspring will be lowercase t, lowercase t. Rather than referring to things as capital T, lowercase t, scientists have given words to these different pairings. If the 2 alleles are the same, then we refer to those as being homozygous. And if the 2 alleles are different in an organism, then they are called heterozygous. So if we have a plant that has the capital T, we refer to that as having the homozygous dominant genotype. And if we have a plant with capital T, lowercase t, since they are different, we refer to that as the heterozygous genotype. And if they have two lowercase t's, again, both of those are the same, so we refer to that as homozygous recessive. It is important that if you are referring to the homozygous condition, you need to put whether or not it is a dominant or recessive. And those particular plants would be true breeding, and the heterozygous organisms will be hybrid for that particular trait, or a combination of the two conditions. All right, so let's do a little bit of a different problem using the law of dominance. So for this case, we are going to use the condition capital B is the dominant condition for brown eyes, and lowercase b is the recessive condition which results in blue eyes. So we're looking at the trait of eye color, and the two alleles are brown and blue. So if we take two heterozygous parents, so heterozygous we know means that one will have the dominant trait, the dominant allele for the trait, and the other allele will be the recessive. So we have our two parents will be capital B lowercase b, capital B lowercase b. So now we make our Punnett square, and we will place these capital B and lowercase b, because this represents one parent's potential gametes, and then we will do the top for the second one, which we will have capital B lowercase b. Then we will do our multiplication, capital B, capital B, capital B across, the lowercase b down. Here we have capital B lowercase b. Now it doesn't matter which order. I could put this B, capital B, and it doesn't matter what order it's in. I just tend to always put the capital letter first, especially when I'm looking to see what's happening in the problem. But either way you do it, it's going to be the same outcome. It does not matter if it is looking like this or this. Both of these are going to display the same characteristic, and both are going to be heterozygous, and both are going to have the brown coloration. So if we look here, if I was looking for the phenotype, then I would have the law of dominance is in play. So this one, and this one. So 3/4 of my offspring will have brown eyes. And if I look here, this one, or 1/4, will display blue eyes. If I'm going to look at the genotypes of these particular offspring, then I am going to find that, I'm going to move this up a little bit, that for my offspring I have 1/4 will be homozygous dominant, 1/2 will be heterozygous, and 1/4 will be homozygous recessive. So now you may want to try a practice problem on your own, see how you do. So you may want to pause the video, and I want you to cross, using the law of dominance, we have capital B equals brown eyes, lowercase b equals blue eyes, a homozygous dominant parent with a heterozygous parent. So you may want to pause it right now and then try it out, do the Punnett square, and then come back to check your answer. Okay, I hope you were able to figure it out on your own, but if we had a homozygous dominant parent, that would be capital B, capital B. And we had a heterozygous parent, that would be capital B, lowercase b. Remembering that capital B stands for brown eyes and lowercase b stands for blue eyes. So we would do the Punnett square. We take parent number 1, then we take parent number 2, figure out their potential gametes, and then we complete the Punnett square. If we were to look at the genotypes for this cross, we will find that these will be 1/2 or 2/4 will be homozygous dominant, and 1/2 will be, okay, 1/2 will be heterozygous. Now, if we look for the phenotypes, we notice that this one, this one, this one, and this one, or all of our offspring, will have brown eyes. So I hope you're able to figure out this information and hopefully solve some basic Punnett Square problems on your own. You can probably Google them. I bet there's some out there for you to get further practice in this. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.